So the news out of New York City recently, it really hit like a political earthquake, didn't it?
Absolutely.
This young, self-described Democratic Socialist upstart he secured a stunning victory in the Democratic mayoral primary.
Yeah, not just a win, but beating someone like former Governor Andrew Cuomo, and pretty handily, too.
Exactly. It wasn't just, squeaking by. This was an upset that's sending ripples, everywhere
It
politically.
really is. It kind of rips open the conventional wisdom in American politics, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And this deep dive, it isn't just about who Zohran Mamdani is, though we'll cover that. It's more about what his, surprising triumph reveals.
Reveals about what, exactly?
Well, about New York's shifting political landscape, sure, but also, the soul-searching happening inside the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And maybe the surprising strength of progressive movements right now.
Okay. And we've dug into quite a bit of material for you today. We've got recent election reports, profiles on Mamdani, detailed info on the Democratic Socialists of America platform, that sort of thing.
Right.
Our mission here is pretty straightforward. Boil it down for you. Extract the key insights so you get a clear, concise understanding of who Zohran Mamdani is, what he stands for, and maybe most importantly, why this victory is causing such a stir.
Yeah, cut through the noise, get you informed quickly.
Exactly. So let's start with the man himself. Who is Zohran Mamdani, this 33-year-old Democratic Socialist who just pulled off this major upset in New York?
Well, what's really striking, first off, is his unique background. He was born in Kampala, Uganda, back in 1991.
Uganda, okay.
Yeah. His parents are the academic Mahmoud Mamdani and the filmmaker Mira Nair. Pretty well-known, Jane.
Mira Nair, the filmmaker.
Exactly. He came to the U.S. when he was 7, settled right here in New York City, and only became a U.S. citizen fairly recently, in 2018.
2018, that's interesting.
It is, that multicultural background, the recent citizenship.
Huh.
It's important context for his whole story,
And his path wasn't straight into politics either, was it? I read he was a hip-hop musician.
Okay.
And a housing counselor.
That's right. Not the typical resume. He had this career in music, then worked as a housing counselor. It's a compelling story. Definitely seems to resonate.
How do you think those different sort of non-political experiences shaped him?
Well, that's a great point because they seem to connect pretty directly to his ideology, right? He joined the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, back in 2017.
Okay, 2017.
Yeah, and worked on several progressive campaigns before he actually won his state assembly seat in 2020.
And he kept winning that seat.
He did. Reelected unopposed in 22 and 24. So that shows, consistent, strong support locally. His grassroots appeal wasn't just a flash in the pan.
And he wasn't afraid of direct action either. I remember reading about a hunger strike.
Yeah, that made headlines. He joined a hunger strike with taxi drivers back in 2021, really showed an early commitment, putting himself on the line for working class issues.
Okay, so that gives us a sense of the person. Now, let's pivot to the ideas. What's he actually proposing for New York City? What's the core of his platform that got voters so energized?
Well, if you look at the big picture, the campaign hammered away on affordability. That was clearly the top issue for New Yorkers in this race.
Made sense.
His platform has some really ambitious promises, things like banning rent increases for 4 years on rent-stabilized apartments.
Okay.
And offering free city bus services.
Free city buses. Wow. That's a bold one, especially for a city like New York. Has anything remotely like that been tried here before?
Yes, actually. There was a fare free bus pilot program. Ran from September 2023 to August 2024.
Really? Which routes?
It was on 5 specific routes: the Q4, B60, BX18, M116, and the S4696.
Okay. And what happened? Did it work?
Well, the results were pretty remarkable, actually. They saw a 30% increase in weekday ridership.
30%? That's huge.
It is. And most of those new riders were people earning less than $28,000 a year. But here's something even more surprising.
What's that?
Assaults on bus operators dropped by nearly 39%. 38.9% to be exact.
Wait, assaults went down by that much. That seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Usually you hear concerns about safety or fare evasion disputes.
Exactly. It's a really surprising data point.
Yeah.
It suggests maybe reducing that friction point, the fare itself, might have broader positive effects.
So why did it end then, if it had results like that?
Well, state lawmakers didn't reauthorize it, and the MTA, the transit authority, they reportedly opposed it. Concerns about, fare collection confusion across the system.
Okay.
That 39% drop in assaults, though, That's really something to think about, isn't it? What that implies beyond just ridership.
It really is.
So besides the rent freeze and free buses, what else is on his affordability agenda? It sounds like there's more.
Oh, yeah. He's proposed universal childcare, opening city-subsidized grocery stores, one in each borough, specifically for low-income residents.
Subsidized groceries.
In
Interesting.
a big one, he vowed to create 200,000 new affordable apartments.
200,000. Wow.
Yeah. And critically, he supports raising New York City's minimum wage to $30 per hour by 2030. $30 an hour. Okay, that's a significant agenda. Which leads to the obvious question, how does he plan to pay for all of this?
Right, the funding question. It's always the big one. He proposes a couple of major tax changes. First, increasing corporate taxes in New York State to match New Jersey's rate, which is 11.5%.
Match New Jersey, okay.
And second, a new 2% income tax hike specifically on city residents earning over $1 million a year.
A millionaire's tax for the city.
Basically, yeah. The goal is to raise around $20 billion with these.
And that money would go towards?
Towards things like tuition-free CUNY and SUNY schools, the city and state universities, plus statewide universal childcare, freezing subway fares, and those tenant protections we mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. Critics immediately point out the big hurdle. Raising taxes like that at the city level usually needs state approval. New York City doesn't have complete control over its own tax policy.
The home rule issue.
Right.
Exactly. The major structural barrier. And then there's the fear, that hiking taxes on the wealthy could just cause them to leave the city. An exodus.
So, feasibility concerns and the potential economic impact. What's the argument from Mamdani's side? How do they counter that?
Well, his supporters argue it's about reclaiming needed revenue from corporations and the very wealthy who, they say, haven't been paying their fair share. They believe investing in the working class is actually key to the city's long-term economic health.
So it's framed as an investment.
Right. And while they acknowledge the state approval challenge, the idea is that a strong mandate from city voters for these policies could create enough political pressure on Albany to act. It's basically setting up a fight, betting that voter enthusiasm can overcome the legislative hurdles.
A political gamble, then.
You could say that. It's definitely a clash between local progressive goals and the realities of state politics.
And beyond the economics, his approach to public safety is different too, right? Less focus on just policing.
Yes. He advocates more for a community-based approach, arguing that things like dignified work, economic stability, and well-resourced neighborhoods, his words are actually more effective at creating real public safety than just adding more police officers.
Okay. Now, we have to talk about the controversies. His stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict became a huge flashpoint in the campaign, didn't it?
It really did. This is obviously a deeply divisive issue. Mamdani is very critical of Israel's actions. He uses terms like apartheid and genocide.
Strong language.
Very. And he supports the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, BDS.
Okay.
He even introduced a bill in the state assembly aiming to stop registered charities from funding organizations involved in illegal West Bank settlements or supporting actions deemed war crimes in Gaza.
And he was arrested at a protest.
Yes, back in October 2023. At a pro-Palestinian ceasefire rally, he said then, now is not the time to be silent. He also reported receiving death threats after that.
There was also criticism about him not co-sponsoring Holocaust Remembrance Day resolutions, though his campaign pushed back on that.
Right. His campaign said he did vote for them and commemorated the day on social media, but didn't co-sponsor. But the bigger firestorm was probably around his use of the phrase, globalize the Intifada.
Yes, that drew a lot of attention.
He described it as a symbolic call for Palestinian human rights. But it drew immediate, strong condemnation from some Jewish public figures and even the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. They accused him of, exploiting their name and sanitizing a term they associate with violence against Jews.
But it wasn't a universal condemnation from Jewish leaders.
No, and that's key. Other prominent Jewish leaders, like City Controller Brad Lander and Congressman Jerry Nadler, they either defended him or endorsed him. So it really highlights a complex and, frankly, deepening split among American Jews on this issue.
So not a monolithic view at all. And former Governor Cuomo, his opponent, really tried to use this against him, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Cuomo is actually part of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's legal defense team.
Right. I remember that.
So he tried hard to make Mamdani's views on Israel the central issue, arguing his rhetoric fueled hate, and pro-Cuomo groups, heavily funded by pro-Israel billionaires, like $500,000 from Bill Ackman, $8 million from Michael Bloomberg. They hammered this point home.
8 million from Bloomberg alone. Wow.
Huge money.
Huh.
But polling suggests the Democratic base, even in New York, is shifting away from just unconditional support for Israel. So Cuomo's attacks maybe didn't land as hard as he expected. The ground might be shifting there, too.
Interesting. Okay, beyond the huge global issues, what about very local but still controversial social policies like the specialized high school test?
Yes, the SHSAT, another hot-button issue in NYC. He supports eliminating that test as the sole factor for getting into those elite public high schools.
Why? What's the argument there?
The argument is that the test perpetuates racial bias and segregation in those schools. You see disproportionately few Black and Hispanic students getting admitted based solely on that one test.
Right.
The interesting wrinkle, of course, is that Mamdani himself actually got into one of those schools using that test. He was a beneficiary of the very system he now wants to change.
That adds another layer. Okay, let's zoom out. What does this win, this whole story, mean for the Democratic Party nationally? Is this a blip, or is it a sign of something bigger?
Well, it's definitely being seen as an inflection point. It's certainly exposed some fiery divisions within the party.
How so?
Well, for starters, Republicans are already seizing on it, calling it a political gift, saying Mamdani will become the face of the Democratic Party and that he'll hurt moderate Democrats in swing districts. You even had former President Trump weigh in, calling him a 100% communist lunatic.
Predictable, perhaps. But what about within the Democratic Party? What's the internal reaction?
It's really split. You have figures like Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, sounding the alarm, basically warning this kind of progressive shift is dangerous for the party.
Okay, the establishment concern.
Right. But then on the other side, you have Senator Bernie Sanders, who endorsed Mamdani. He basically scoffed at the critics and urged other Democrats to follow Mamdani's lead.
So a real tug of war.
Exactly. And Mamdani himself, he frames his win as proof the party has, in his words, abandoned working-class voters. He argues his victory shows the path back is reconnecting with those voters on economic issues.
And it definitely feels like a boost for pro-Palestine politics within the U.S. Democratic Party, right? Especially after all that outside spending trying to defeat progressives over Israel.
Absolutely. That's a huge takeaway. For a candidate with his views on Israel-Palestine to win so decisively, despite millions spent against him, it suggests the tide might be turning on that issue within the party primaries.
So it seems like his win shows, at least in a heavily Democratic city like New York, that these quite left-wing policies are electorally viable.
Precisely. And now the stage is set for the general election against the incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, who's running as an independent this time. That's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it really will be. His win isn't just a local New York story, is it? It feels like a national signal.
Definitely.
So, just to recap, we've unpacked the story of Zohran Mamdani, this politician with a really interesting, unique background, a very bold, progressive agenda focused squarely on making New York City more affordable, especially for working people.
And a contentious stance on global issues, particularly Israel-Palestine, that has fractured some traditional political alliances.
Right. And we've explored how his victory seems to reflect these deeper divisions, these evolving priorities within the Democratic Party itself, and maybe challenges some old assumptions about who is considered electable.
Yeah. So as we watch Zohran Mamdani now, preparing to potentially lead America's largest city, maybe the provocative thought to leave you with is this.
Okay.
What does his rise really tell us about how the definition of electability might be changing in American politics, especially for candidates who are, unapologetically embracing democratic socialist ideas?
And could his approach, combining those bold progressive policies with a really pragmatic focus on local gut issues like housing and transit, could that reshape the political landscape beyond New York? Could it become a new kind of template for campaigns elsewhere?
Exactly. Something for all of us to think about as this unfolds.